All right. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, John Rayon, and my guest today on the Always Direct podcast is Bill Flynn. He's a rock star business growth coach. His company is called Catalyst Growth Advisors. He's changed the lives of many entrepreneurs, and I'm very happy to have him on the show. Bill, thanks for coming on.
Very happy to be here, John. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Bill, tell us about your company and what you're doing now.
So my company is called Catalyst Growth Advisors. So I do sort of three things. I'm primarily a business coach. So I teach leadership teams a framework on how to grow a healthy and thriving business. I also am an author. I have a book out called Further Faster. It's been out for about a year. And I speak mostly around the country, but I've done some international things as well.
Yeah. That book, I looked it up. It's doing really well on Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah, it's doing all right. Most business books don't sell a ton. You don't usually make any money on your book. But I think if 500 copies, give or take, I've got five. I only have one not 5-star review, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. You got to have haters, right? I mean,
gotta have one. It was a 3. I wouldn't call it a hater. Just a 3.
Just a 3. All right, cool. So Bill, how did you get into this, into consulting and helping people grow their business? You do, is there like a niche that you work on? Is there, I read that you do a lot of tech startups, but is there anything in specific or just any kind of startups?
I don't work with startups.
You don't work with startups?
Me generally. Not at all.
That's probably true.
I volunteer for startups, but I'm pretty expensive, and most startup founders aren't willing to put in the money because I'm a coach, so I don't have like a guarantee. You have to do the work. I'm just giving you the tools.
Sure.
You actually have to build the thing. So no, I work with generally companies that are already have some sort of product market fit. They have some repeatability to their business, and they're just really looking to scale in a healthier way, in a faster way. So I'm not looking at any particular industry, doesn't matter. It's really the mindset of the CEO or the head of the company that I'm looking for. And he or she has to be humble, has to be a lifelong learner, and has to be comfortable constantly challenging the status quo. If they can do that, then I can work with them. I don't care. As long as they can afford me, I can work with anyone.
Definitely. How long have you had this company, and how'd you get started in it?
I think I'm a little over 5 years is how long I've been doing this. So I did 10. So the startup thing is I did 10 startups over about 25 years. And that was sort of where I cut my teeth, if you will. And I decided around 5 or 6 years ago, do I want to do an 11 startup? Maybe, maybe not. I got a taste of sort of being a coach around 10 or so years ago. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. So I'm really glad I did. I just love what I do. It's a blast. It's really, I can see the impact that I have with teams, be it on the financial sheets or on the team alignment, on the ability for the CEO or the owner to relax a little bit and not have to sort of feel like he or she has to do everything. So it's got a lot of really good benefits to it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so did you say you were involved with many startups before? Were you the owner? Were you actually the CEO of them, or were you part of the team? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, I was always like the sales marketing guy. So I was a scale guy. I was the operator that made the thing get there, and we did pretty well. So I was 5 for 6. My first 6, we had 5 what would be called successful events, either an IPO or an acquisition. Generally, I say if it's at least 3x of the original investment, then it's a success. So some were way more than that.
Sure.
Some companies I work with were worth $1 billion on the public markets, which was, heady times. They were totally overblown. I believe Greenspan called it irrational exuberance at the time.
Yeah, what's happening right now too, isn't it? A little bit.
Exactly. So it did a whole bunch of those. Mostly work with a team of people to do that. All different industries, all in software or SaaS or something like that, but in high tech. But lots of different. I was in data backup. I was in e-commerce. I was in mobile commerce. I was in advertising, internet advertising, that kind of stuff. So lots of different stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. And so what do you think is the most important part of having a good sales team?
So you have to have a good leader. I think in any situation, you have a good leader. And most sales leaders really, to me, only have three jobs. One is they have to figure out how to hire really well. They say if you have good players, you don't have to be as good a coach.
Sure.
And it's really hard to hire salespeople. Salespeople are the best interviewers on the planet.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily see the actual human being who you hired until like 90 days in. And what I found as well in my research of businesses and success is that ironically, interviewing is the worst way to hire anyone for several reasons. One is obviously from a salesperson's perspective, what I just said is that, you know, they're lying to themselves and they're lying to you because they want to get the job. Second is we have about 150 unconscious biases that enter the interview process in the first half second. And so if for some reason we like this person and we don't even know why, maybe because it reminds us of a good friend or has, you know, someone we've known in the past, or she might look like an old girlfriend that totally jilted you, you have made a judgment immediately. And the rest of the conversation is predicated on that judgment. So if you like them, you'll actually go easier on them with your questions and you'll let them go on their answers. If you don't like them, you're going to truly press them and they probably won't get the job anyway. So that's a problem. It's an actual problem. The data shows that we have a 50% hit rate on hiring, which is basically a flip of a coin. Not very good.
You're right.
So the best way to hire someone is actually to get someone who you believe has at least the minimum amount of skills and you think has a good fit in your business. And I recommend hire two people for the same job, put them in the job and see what happens. You'll know in 90 to 120 days if you did a good job. Now, most people won't do that because it's a pain in the ass. It's also probably expensive, et cetera. But the only way you're gonna know if someone's gonna actually perform well in the job and get along with the people is to put them in those situations. So the more you can do that in the interview process, the more likely you are to get a higher hit rate.
Sure.
So I actually completely changed my interview process when I brought on new salespeople because the way I was taught to interview didn't work. So I looked into how to do it as well as I could. And I eventually got up to about an 85% hit rate, which was pretty good.
It sounds, I mean, listen, if you can guarantee 85, if you can get 85% on hiring, that's very impressive. I find many people.
So that's the first thing you do. You gotta hire really well. No, they don't. So the second thing you got to do after hiring well, you got to train and train and train and train. Never stop training your salespeople. Hone their skills on being good salespeople in general. Hone their skills on how to sell your product. There are so many nuances to selling that you should never stop training your salespeople. And then lastly, you need to know how to build capacity, right? When do you need to hire a salesperson in order for them to hit full quota? What do they need to go through? Those are the three things you need to do: interview really well, hire really well, then train your salespeople, never stop training them, and then make sure that you have a capacity model that you built. If you do those three things, you'll be a good leader of a sales team. Now, remember, it's nothing I mentioned was you being a good salesperson.
Yeah, I'm waiting for something like that. So you almost prefer people who have the ability to be great salespeople, but who have not been bogged down with the bad habits from previous jobs. Is that what you're saying? Kind of.
Yeah. So when I hired for folks, I never even bothered to interview anyone unless they were number one or number two twice in their previous companies. Then we'd look at those resumes and then we'd say, okay, you know, who should we bring in, that kind of stuff. Because they at least showed, you can get lucky, right? You can get with a really hot company and you look like you're a great salesperson, but it had nothing to do with you, little to nothing to do with you. But if you did it twice, you're much more likely to have had to be a little bit about you. It's not a guarantee, but at least twice gets you, I think, increases your chances of talking to the right people. And typically in the sales interview and working with them, I could figure out if it was luck or if they actually had some chops.
Yeah. So, but what do you do? What's your favorite sales strategy? Emails, cold calling, direct mail, LinkedIn. How do you? I mean, I'm sure you're going to say all of them, but what is the number one way to get sales for software sales or even SaaS sales, anything of that nature? What's your number one way to get people on board that you teach your staff?
Referrals. referrals and references are the best way to get new clients.
Oh,
That's always the best, right? Is that someone who already uses you is willing to help you in some way, shape, or form. So actually what you have to do in order to do that, you have to go back into the process and make sure that you truly understand who your best customer is, how you're truly helping them, how you're making their lives better, what your progress is. And then no matter what methodology you use, because I wouldn't necessarily say what you said was a strategy. It's a methodology, right? Email is a methodology. LinkedIn is a methodology. These are just methods that you use to attract people, to put out awareness. So in order to make sure that you are doing that well, you need to know where those people are. And then once you find out where they are, then you need to know what to say to them, right? So the example I like to give at the highest level, and most people understand, is Waze versus Google Maps.
yeah.
Right. So Google Maps, they made a way better map than MapQuest. And MapQuest really isn't around anymore. I looked it up. You can still get to MapQuest, but no one uses them anymore.
Nobody.
They use Google Maps when they want a map. However, what do people hire a map for? One of the reasons we hire a map is to get from point A to point B on time. And the guys at Waze understood that and said, okay, we can make a map, but what would we build? If these people really are trying to solve this problem, what would we build with the tools that are available to us that allows them to do that? And then within, I think, 3 to 5 years, Google bought them for it was either 1.3 or 1.6. I never know the number, $billion. There were only 50 people or something at the company. Why? Because they totally understood their customer. They understood what job they hired. One of the key jobs they hired the map to do for them. And then they built something that worked. Now, in terms of B2B or whatever, you have that. And then you should go to the places that work for you. What I did is I said, who's the kind of customer that works for me? And that's it's a humble lifelong learner who's constantly challenging the status quo. That's my main client. Where do they go? What I found is they're Vistage members, they're EO members, they're YPO members. They are part of Small Giants. So I started to cultivate relationships with those people because I was much more likely to have that mindset in that arena. How I reach them, I could reach them by email, whatever. That's to me secondary to making sure you completely understand who they are and then where do they congregate, because like people hang out with like people. And if you can find that, then you'll have much less trouble finding them, creating awareness, and then getting them interested in what you're doing. That's what I found.
Definitely. Very, very powerful. So first, I should have definitely, I mean, first things first, figure out who your customers are, what they like, where they go, what they really, really need, and what you're fulfilling with your company, and then go at that point, figure out where they are. And then that's where you need to be. That's what you need to immerse yourself into. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So how long ago did you write your book? And is it a compilation of everything you've learned over the last 30 years or 25 years? Or is it something specific that's happened to you?
Sure. So my book was published on March 17th, 2020. So right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I didn't actually write my book. I hired a company and I spoke my book mostly. And then someone who writes way better than I do wrote my book.
Smart man.
I'm not a very good writer. Yeah. And I don't really like it. It would have taken me years and years and years to write a book. And I knew it would never happen. So, and I really didn't set out to write a book. I had no interest in writing a book because in the research I've done is I read 30 to 50 books a year, mostly in the arena that I work in. And I found that many of them say the same thing. It's the 8 ways to do it, or the 4 ways to do this, or the 6 ways to do that, or, it's just the same thing over and over again. And if you go back in time, this is just Drucker, Deming, Shine, McGregor, Porter, Collins, all these thought leaders. We're just repackaging everything we've been taught in management science over the last 100 years. That's all we're really doing. There are very few new ideas that I came across. So I had no interest in writing a book, but what I found over time is that my clients and my peers, I'm in 2 different coaching organizations, would say, even though we're saying we're sort of talking about the same things, the way that I approach it was unique to them. So they said, you need to write all this stuff down. And I said, well, look, I don't want to write it down. So I had my business grow to a certain size so I could afford to hire, because it's pretty expensive to hire a third party. So that's sort of how I came about doing it. And all the book really is I've basically said, here's what I've learned over the time. And I studied success. What do the most successful leaders have in common? And what I found is that there are three things that all of them do, and they do them really, really, really well. Not just sort of well, but really well. And that is, they understand that performance is a team sport. They understand that their business is basically one big system made up of small subsystems and components. And they optimize the system based upon where their strengths were, not necessarily the whole system. And then lastly is, they understood if they really wanted to grow, the cash is their primary financial growth metric, because cash is the only thing that will not lie to you on your P&L and your balance sheet. You can make everything else lie to you: profit, working capital, revenue, whatever. And if you want to grow, you need cash to grow. It costs money to grow your business, and you have to pay in front of growth. You have to buy a factory, you have to hire people, you have to put in software systems ahead of it. Because if you don't, then typically what happens is the growth thing kills you, right? It's called the growth paradox, is that you're in this problem where you're growing too fast and you can't handle it. And then that pisses off your customers, and then they leave you, and then you're sort of scrambling they're coming off the back of the truck while you're trying to put people on the front of the truck, et cetera. So those are the things that I found out, that great leaders like Alan Mulally and Bob Chapman and John Mackey and Kip Tindell and Herb Kelleher of Southwest, and name your leader that built great companies, and what they did really well. They did these three things really well, I've found. And all I did was I basically applied the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, to all the management science that I learned. So there's tons of other stuff you can do, but if you do these three things and focus on these three things, it'll get you the furthest, the fastest. And that's why I call my book Further Faster.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And so that brings me to the books that I was going to ask you. What books do you recommend for aspiring entrepreneurs? I know you just listed out 5 of those main guys, but is there any specific books that you would say, absolutely, you got to read this book if you want to be an entrepreneur or a sales leader?
Yeah. So, so what I do is, since I read a lot, I also want to help people. So actually, there are about 100 books on my website.
Ooh.
And I have listed them out by category. And then the ones that I think are the best ones in each category, I put an asterisk next to. And I think there are about 20 or 21. And so depending on what you're interested in doing, I would recommend a certain book. But the books that helped me the most at the highest level, and that I continue to read and reread, one is a book by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall called 9 Lies About Work. And they've done similar things over the last 20 years, as they researched companies, and they found out that a lot of what we're taught as leaders is just wrong. And this is why most businesses go out of business. Actually, if you look at the data over the last 25, 30 years, you only have a 50% chance of lasting 5 years as a business, according to stats. And actually, the number gets worse. The longer you're in business, the less likely you're going to stay in business. I think it's 16% after 25 years. So if you started a business 25 years ago, only 16% of them are actually still in business 25 years later. Wow. And that's sort of not intuitive, because you'd think you'd get better at it, right? Mm-hmm. Is you do it more often, you learn, et cetera. But my theory is that tiny errors compound, is that we don't do anything really, really badly. We just do a little badly at a whole bunch of things, and they add up, right? So we don't quite have our strategy nailed. We don't really know who our core customer is. We're kind of guessing. We hired this one guy and we kept him, and then he hired 3 other people, and that's sort of cascading. We don't really do change very well. We don't really do decision-making very well. And those things just start to add up and get heavier and heavier and heavier, and make it harder for us to survive. The book that got me started was something called Scaling Up, which is, I think Vern Harnish, who wrote it about 30 years ago, had a lot of things right. I don't think he had everything right, but I think he had the basics right. His philosophy is that you need to have It's about people, strategy, execution, and cash. I think it's not people, it's team. Team is more important than an individual or a culture over time. Strategy and execution are not two separate things. They're two sides of the same coin. You execute your strategy. And if you focus on executing on your strategy and improving your strategy, you'll get better and better and better. And lastly, the cash thing. So I think he nailed the cash thing. I had no improvements on the cash thing. I think he nailed that.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I don't know what percentage, but it's very high up there that a lot of businesses fail just because they're underfunded. And that's, a lot of people think they can, shoestring it the whole way, but it's not that easy. Shoestringing it, you can stretch a dollar, but there's a certain point where you just need to keep investing in it, and then you become like depressed when you don't have enough funds to do the things you need to do to increase your business or to scale it up. I know a lot of people who've gone out because they didn't have enough funding, so definitely need a lot of cash.
Yeah, I think that's a consequence. That's not a reason. If you actually do the work up front, in most businesses, except if it's it's a high cost business, like a lot of infrastructure costs.
Sure.
But if you want to start a software business, you don't need, if you're the coder, you don't need any money, zero money. What you need is you need to be curious. You need to be empathetic. You need to actually care about the problem and the customer, and you need to learn. We don't do that. We think that we have the right idea and we start building something, we hire people, etc. But we've never really tested if people care. 9 out of 10, according to some stats, 9 out of 10 startups fail. Many of them should fail because they weren't really solving a problem we're solving. But most of them failed because they didn't do the right work up front, in my opinion. You need, I've done 10 startups and I've been relatively, and from a statistical perspective, I and some of my peers are off the charts in terms of success, right? I was 5 for 6. That's 85%. That's a phenomenal number. It's 10% is the average. So we did something right. And it wasn't just me. There was certainly a lot of other people. So I get asked all the time, what is your advice? I'm a founder, or what would you say to my founder? And my advice is always the same. There's only 2 things you need to do is when you're starting up a company. One is solve a problem worth solving, and solve it in a way that enough people will pay you enough money to make a real business out of it. The second one's harder than the first. And so that's sort of one thing. And the second thing is don't run out of money. That's all you have to do. Once you've solved the problem we're solving and then you want to scale, then it's a different thing you're doing. Now you have a real business and you're growing the business. I love Steve Blank's definition of what a startup is. A startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. If you don't find a business model, you're not a real business. It's only when you do. And that's what a startup founder's job is to do, is to figure out what is a business model. Is there a customer or enough customers who care about this problem enough that will give me money so I can make a real business? When we don't do that, we keep asking for more funds. Right? I need more money. We just need more money. I need to hire more people. I need to do this, whatever. I think we got it backwards. As a salesperson, if my CEO came to me and said, how successful you can be, I'm going to say, you know what? This is really tough, but 10% of the time, I can guarantee 10% of the time, we're going to be good. I would get fired in a minute, right? But that's a VC's track record. 10%. That's not a good track record. It doesn't need to be that way either. So I just think we do it wrong.
Wow.
So I'm a bit of an iconoclast.
So, wow, that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, I've never really thought about it that way. I'm going to start implementing that into my life right now. Yeah. As soon as we get out of here, I'm going to start implementing it. So thanks for the free info. Well, that's why we're here, right? Share some knowledge.
No problem.
Yeah. So there's going to be some pitfalls, some mistakes you've made that you wish you didn't do, and other people can learn from your mistakes. I'm sure there's,
yes,
we all have millions, right? But like something that sticks out in your mind, something like the first thing you think about.
Yeah. So
marriage. Don't say that.
Yeah. It gets back to one of the things you said. I was not a great leader because I either was taught or sort of intuited that I needed to know everything. I needed to be responsible and for all of like for all of the success. You know, it's sort of my responsibility to make that happen. And it's not. I learned that your job as a leader is actually to create the environment for other people to be successful and for other people to run either your department, your division, your business for you. And your job as a leader is to predict the future, not to run the present. So I think as I look back on these things, even though we had a great track record, man, we made it way harder on ourselves than we needed to. We did a lot of things we didn't need to do that weren't that important. One of my favorite sayings is few things truly matter, but those that do matter tremendously. And if you can figure out those few things that matter to your two most important constituencies, and they are your best customers, not your customers, your best customers, because your best customers, according to the Pareto principle, if really 80% of your profit and cash comes from 20% of your customers, your best customers are 16 times more valuable than everyone else. Your job should be to find one more of those, because that's the equivalent of bringing on 16 others. Now, in terms of putting resource behind that, that's a no-brainer, right? Now, but we don't do that. We're like, oh, we just need revenue. We just need to sign somebody. We need to do some unnatural act so we can bring this guy on. And then 2 or 3 years later, you regret the unnatural act because now your company is spread wide and thin. And then something like 9/11 happens, or 2008, or COVID, and many businesses who are too thin go out of business. They didn't have to, but they chased the wrong thing. They chased revenue. So that's sort of the thing I learned was, really make sure that you create the environment for success and then put people in the best positions to be as successful as they can be. Creating a good team is a phenomenal skill, and it's super hard because people are spiky and weird and idiosyncratic, right? That's a skill. It's totally teachable, but it takes a while to sort of do it. I would have done things differently had I known what I know now.
Are there any tools that you always your go-to tools as a sales leader when you were in that field? What are the top tools that you would recommend, whether it be CRM or something of that nature, something to help your job go easier? What do you recommend? Because there's a lot of things out there's a lot of crap out there right now. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah, there is. So, and by the way, I haven't been a sales leader for 6 or 7 years. So, and there've been a ton of tools that have come out.
Sure.
So having a system that allows you not only to track success, but also using that tool. So I think there are 2 tools that are the best tools to have. And, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot or, what's the one with the Z that's free?
Zoho.
I mean, they all basically do the same thing. We overcomplicate them too much, but we also don't use them. So the other tool is the sales meeting. That's a tool. The sales meeting is the best way to increase your ability to increase sales. Why? Because that is where the team comes together, can learn from each other, can learn from other folks, and you have all the data in front of you if you use it well. We don't run really good sales meetings that I've found. Sales meetings should have 2 or 3, and this is in my book as a chapter, is how to run a really good sales meeting. And it's basically is make sure that you as a leader get the information you need as confidently as possible to give to the organization. So how many deals are we going to have? How close are we going to hit to our number? All that kind of stuff, and be able to figure that out. And I show a couple of ways to do that, but also is use the time wisely. Everyone in sales, we're not all the same. We're not all exactly the same. Some are really good at opening. Some are really good at the middle of the deal. Some are good at closing. Some are good at negotiating. Having those tools and that expertise in the room and not leveraging it and having other people bring up other people's levels is a waste of time. Also, there's great knowledge inside the company and outside the company you should invite into your sales meeting to teach you how to do something that you don't necessarily do very well. So I had an organization where we were doing a mobile platform app, sort of as an app download platform. It optimizes, and it was a pretty complicated process. It was an algorithm that had a lot of complexity to it. And we did a pretty good job, but my team was struggling. So I had the people who did the work, once we signed them, they did the work of optimizing the system for them. And I said, I need you to explain this as if a 12-year-old was listening. And they did a phenomenal job. And over 2 days, my team, after about a year of selling, came and said, that was the best 2 days we've ever had. I actually know how our stuff works, and I know how to explain it to someone so they can get excited. I had one guy that said, as soon as I know that as soon as I get in front of somebody, I'm going to sell them. That's a level of confidence he had after that 2 days. That's something we don't take advantage of. You know, we're about admonishing the team and, you know, hey, you got to work harder. You got to make more calls. You know, maybe not. My rules were simple. I don't care how many calls you make, how many calls you don't make. I said, we can argue whether your quota is fair. Let's have that discussion. But once we nail the quota, all I care about is you need to be honest and responsible. You can go after big fish, small fish. You can do 1,000 calls a day. You can do a ton of research ahead of time. I don't care how you make your number, as long as you're honest and responsible. And if you need help, we're here for you. So that was my rules. It was super simple.
Yeah. So you're not a micromanager? Is that what I'm getting off? You don't like to micromanage people.
I can micromanage. I hated it. You know, I still do. I would do ride withs, and you know, there's always stuff where people develop bad habits and things. You know, so you have to pay attention, but you don't have to pay attention like 8 hours a day for your salespeople. You should be like a half an hour a day. You know, go on a few ride withs, join calls, do some role playing, and challenge them, etc., and help them make mistakes so they can learn from them.
Sure,
that's your job, and then they don't need you. Right. I had guys who would need me once a month, and they made their number. They did good deals. There was no complaints in the customer service group or the tech support group or the implementation team. Leave them alone.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. So what organizations are you in, and which ones would you recommend? I know you got your certificate from some entrepreneurship organization. I think it's EO, if I'm not mistaken.
So I'm in probably, I'd say, either loosely or tightly in about 4 or 5 different organizations. Wow. My tight ones are, I'm in an organization that is a spinoff of the Scaling Up organization. So I'm in a coaching organization that leverages some of the Scaling Up stuff, but it's a little more strategic focused. It's called 3HAG, which is a terrible name, but it is what it is. That's what it's called. It's a play off of BHAG from Jim Collins, Big Hairy Audacious Goal. It's 3-year highly achievable goal, and that's the name of the group.
Gotcha.
But there's a lot of really great people in it, tons of people I can learn from. So that's a great group. I love that group. I'm also in something called MG100, which is Marshall Goldsmith's group. Some people may know who he is. Marshall Goldsmith is the #1 executive coach in the world and has been for 12 straight years.
No way.
He has coached 250 out of the top 500 Fortune 500 CEOs. And I'm in his organization. So in that organization is Alan Mulally, who was the CEO of Boeing and Ford, Michael Bungay Stanier, who wrote The Coaching Habit, Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager and all the 23 million other books that have sold under his name, Dory Clark, who's an HBR contributor. There are some pretty high-powered folks in this group that I'm in. So I'm really fortunate to be in it. So those are the ones I'm sort of tightly in. I also have a certificate from the Neuro Leadership Institute. I'm sort of connected to them, but not really very tightly. I'm also connected to a group called Small Giants, which is sort of good to great for the little guy, I sort of say. They're out of Detroit. And then I have loose affiliations with Mass MEP, which is an organization about manufacturers here in Massachusetts. I used to be a Vistage speaker, which is a peer-to-peer advisory group. EO, I've spoken to some EO groups, but I'm not in an EO group or YPO group. They're sort of similar. And actually, Vern Harnish, the Scaling Up guy I mentioned, was the guy who started both EO and YPO 25 years ago.
Wow. That's very powerful. I personally, this is just a personal thing, I'm not involved with many organizations. And believe it or not, I was going to start around when the pandemic started, and I'm like, I'm going to probably join EO. That's probably the first one I was started off with, but then the whole thing happened. Everything became Zoom, so I just held off. But I definitely have found that everybody I've talked to who has done anything significant in their life is always involved with a couple of organizations. It does magic. It's like a magical thing that happens when two or more brains get together, magic happens. I hear, So if you were going to recommend one for an average entrepreneur, which one would you recommend?
I'm not going to recommend one. I'll recommend two. Either Small Giants,
okay,
which is more of a purpose-driven methodology, or EO, which is a little more operationally oriented than the Small Giants. But either one of those, for a small guy, I think it's great. If you're a larger company, if you're 10 million or more, YPO is probably better. There are people that are more like you. They're bigger companies generally. Those would be the sort of the two or three. I see EO and YPO as the same thing. They're just by size. EO generally does the small guys. YPO is the larger guys. They kind of do the same thing. But I really like the folks at Small Giants. They're phenomenal. They're doing it for all the right reasons as well. So those would be the ones that I recommend taking a look at.
I will. Well, I want to just say thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and you've spread a lot of wisdom, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Well, let's stay in touch, and Bill, you have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Cheers.
Cheers.